Philosophers should not look down on moneymakers. Vice versa, moneymakers should not look down on philosophers. I think we're entering an era where the beautiful combination is philosophers taking one step closer towards the builders taking one step closer towards the philosophers, without watering down what it means to be a pure philosopher or a pure builder, but kind of meeting in the middle in a meaningful and fulfilling way. Hi guys, a quick video. I want to talk to you about a certain attitude towards money, business, entrepreneurship, industry, innovation, and enterprise that some philosophers or people interested in philosophy, thinkers, or people interested in thought have kind of been brainwashed to hold, in my opinion. And it's not right for philosophers to be brainwashed. It's not right for thinkers to be brainwashed. And therefore, maybe there's some programming around this question that is worth breaking through. So that's what I want to talk to you about. The general attitude is very simple to state, that money and the life that makes money and pursues money and cares about money, really to any extent, I would say, is beneath the dignity of philosophy. So the world's greatest and most important thinker in some way, Socrates, was poor. He lived in 10,000-fold poverty. And so people who emulate the life of Socrates, just like those who emulate the life of Jesus, think that, a rich man can't get into heaven. That's like passing a camel through the eye of a needle. So don't have money, don't make money, don't like money, don't use money, and so on. You can ask for it because you're going to need it. You can request it because without it, you can't live. You can have friends who are rich, but you yourself should just be pure thought. Okay, I used to have that sort of view. I no longer have that view. I think it's, as I said, there's some truth to it, but when it's held as a kind of indoctrination or propaganda or programming, it's no good. At some point, you're going to grow, mature, maybe have a family, for sure have friends, and want to benefit other people. Now, there are different ways that you can benefit people, to be sure. You can benefit them with advice, with support, with your company, okay, with you have heard before the saying that a friend is somebody who doubles your joy and cuts your pain and suffering in half. So you can just be a good friend to people. That's one way to benefit them. But after all, there are things you can do with money that you can't do without money. Aristotle talked about it in the Ethics when, in his discussion of the human excellences or the human virtues, he said that, in general, some of them, and specifically liberality, requires means. Like you have to have, look, if you have a bunch of money, it doesn't guarantee that you're going to spend it well. You could be a Scrooge, very stingy, or you could be a spendthrift and you blow money on the world's stupidest things. And it's in bad taste, and it's gaudy, and it's embarrassing. But there's also a virtue of money spending. There's a correct way to spend money. And if you have $10 in your account, you can't necessarily bestow a statue on the city. If you have $10 million in your account, you may be able to do that. If you have $10 in your account, you may not be able to create a new scientific institution. If you have $10 million or $10 billion in your account, you may be able to do that. So it's nothing against the people who don't have a lot of money. It's nothing against the people who can't do this. Like, you're not a military general, neither am I. Neither one of us can act in a way that's exemplary for a military general and reach the highest peak of honors. It's just that, the military general is in that position. We're not in that position. We have to live honorably in our given station. But it doesn't follow from the fact that you have 10 and someone has 10 million that we should look down on money, or that money can do no good, or that business is automatically less than philosophy. So I'm appending this short comment to a longer video that I just recorded before this, because I wanted to give you a short statement of it. But rather than putting it out into 2 videos, I'm going to have it at the start of this video. And if you want to see how I continue this train of thought, you should watch on, okay? Philosophers should not look down on moneymakers. Vice versa, moneymakers should not look down on philosophers. I think we're entering an era where the beautiful combination is philosophers taking one step closer towards the builders taking one step closer towards the philosophers, without watering down what it means to be a pure philosopher or a pure builder, but kind of meeting in the middle in a meaningful and fulfilling way. Okay, so that's my message for you today, and my longer version of that argument is now coming up. Enjoy. Hi guys, my name is Michael Millerman, millermanschool.com. Today I want to talk to you about the financial advantages of being weird. So I assume that some of you watching this channel, not everybody for sure, but some of you watching this channel are probably introverted. You maybe are a little bit marginalized or ostracized, or for whatever reason, and not because there's anything, let's say, wrong with you, not because you have bad hygiene, not because you're grotesquely ugly, but just because people differ in their personality types. And some people are, let's say, so early to picking up trends, or they have a high degree of openness, if you want to talk in terms of the big five, that you'll pick up on the possibility of something before it's become widespread. And just by virtue of that fact, you will be alone for a little bit. Then the internet allows you to find a community of other, again, not loners in the sense of social outcasts, but early people, early seers, early visionaries, okay? People who are interested in ideas before they have become mainstream. You're not always going to be right. Don't get me wrong. I don't mean that, but you're attracted to something off the beaten path. Now, I saw something the other day, a friend of mine shared it with me, about the personality profiles of Bitcoiners. Okay, I'm not mentioning this because I'm propagating Bitcoin to you. There are different technologies where this may apply, but I think Bitcoin's a pretty nice test case or representative sample, because if you know anything about this, then you know that the price recently has gone over $100,000 and stayed there, and there's big institutional adoption and nation state fear of missing out. And yet it seemed, and for many people still seems, like a completely crazy idea. Internet money, what really is it? What are we talking about when we talk about Bitcoin? How can anybody take it seriously? The anonymous inventor of a Bitcoin, the sort of unknown Satoshi Nakamoto, is now one of the richest people in the world because of his Bitcoin holdings, which is, again, pretty unusual. It's unusual that something that started off so small has become so big. And it's unusual that the person who got the whole thing going has remained anonymous, hasn't moved his money, and so on. So there are a lot of weird things about Bitcoin, which, as I say, could predispose somebody who's looking out for innovation, novelty, transformation, and all that sort of thing to pick up on it. So in this post that I saw on Twitter, there was a survey of the personality types of Bitcoiners. So let me show you that. So you see here, this is a post from Brandon Quittem. It's 2020, okay, November 29th, 2020. So you can check what the Bitcoin price was then, or whatever else you need to know about what was happening in 2020, 5 years ago. But okay, so a quick thread on how Bitcoiners differ from the general population on the Myers-Briggs personality test. If you've heard of that, then you know what we're talking about. And if you haven't heard of that, then you should take a look at the Myers-Briggs personality test. Speaking for myself, I can say I first took it a long time ago, probably in my teenage years. And it was actually very helpful. Now, you may have whatever degree of suspicion you have towards personality tests, but in my case, I thought it was extremely helpful, actually, because I was reading a lot of mystical texts and, things where if you pick a certain personality profile, they're going to find it as complete gibberish. They just won't have an interest in it. Like the nothings and the abyss of being and, the vision of the Godhead, where things, you can't even make a distinction between the seer and the seen, because the seer and the seen are one. Like all of this sort of stuff, right? For many people, that's just, what are you even doing, right? Go touch grass. But as it happened, as I learned as a teenager, when I took this personality test and they had my type, now I don't remember, I think it was INF. I think it was INFP, actually. That was a long time ago, so I don't remember for sure. INFP, probably, maybe INFJ, the one at the bottom of this list. They had like a representative sample for each personality type, a paragraph that characterized what you would find interesting. And the paragraph in that particular personality book test was exactly like, a paragraph from Plotinus or some sort of ontological, metaphysical, mystical, conceptual prose. So I'm like, wow, that's amazing. So it can matter, and on other personality tests, there's some types that are managerial. They love working with other people. They're social workers at heart. And, other people are completely unlike that. Not because one is right, one is wrong, but because people differ. They differ in their aptitudes and their capacities and their potentials and their desires and all of that. So here you see this Myers-Briggs profile. Zoom in for you if that's helpful. And you see that you have in the black line, the frequency in the general population, in the gold line, the frequency among Bitcoiners. So this ISFJ type is pretty frequent in the general population and really not represented among Bitcoiners. And if you go all the way down, to the longest lines among the Bitcoiners, INTP, INFJ, you see that they're overrepresented by Bitcoiners. That I stands for introverted. Okay, so you have some overrepresentation among introverts. And as the poster goes on to say, let me just read this for you in case you're not looking on your screen. Maybe you're listening to this while you do some housework or while you're driving. So he says, I tweeted 500 people self-reported Myers-Briggs, 500 plus people self-reported their Myers-Briggs profile. Then we tallied up the responses. Okay, so yes, it's not representative of all Bitcoiners. Clearly, there's a bias. It's not a scientific study, but it still tells you something. Where are Bitcoiners underrepresented? So 25% of the general population are either ISFJ, defender type, or ESFJ, caregiver. If I remember correctly, so the I and the E, that's introvert, extrovert. S is, here, let me just pull it up. Let's make sure we got it right here. I probably should have done that before. Well, actually, let's skip to this then. So he says most of the people in the Bitcoin community have this characteristic. They're INTJ, architects, personality type with introverted, intuitive, thinking, judging traits. The key point that I want to make to you here is that if you know your personality type, then you can know sort of where to find, if you're not INFJ, you're not INTJ, you're not one of these architect, logician, introvert, mystic, whatever, okay? If you don't match this profile, then you may be curious in the people who do, because to a certain extent, they have provided insight into a very profitable investment opportunity, if that's how you see Bitcoin, as a profitable investment opportunity. You may see it as something else, a lot of my friends do, but at the very least, if you bought it at 30,000, now it's at 130,000 or 120,000 or whatever the case is, that's a profitable investment opportunity that you would have missed out on because you thought that those people who supported it were idiots. So there's alpha, which means an advantage in getting returns in paying attention to some of these marginalized, underrepresented visionary seer types. Something Peter Thiel talks about in 0 to 1, by the way, the paradox of the founder, that he has to be a little bit off the beaten path in order to make the kinds of discoveries that are truly transformative. So that's something to think about. And then if you are such a person, then you should know, I guess, that you may have the intuitive sense already that most people do not see the world like you do. You may have the intuitive sense already that, I see it, why don't they see it, right? I'm brilliant, they're idiots. I'm early, they're going to be late. All the different ways you can think about it. But if you see it as a specific psychological personality comparative advantage that you have, and it is important to you actually to find ways to talk to other people about this meaningfully, then just recognize the fact that you see it because you have certain characteristics and a certain sort of openness. They don't see it because they don't. And rather than just being critical of them, you could find, can you put it in their language? Can you find the right analogies to convey to them the significance of what it is and why it matters? Or on the other hand, maybe you build a company and maybe you build a business, consulting business, investment business, whatever it happens to be, where you take advantage of your specific alpha, you know what I mean? Your specific weirdness in a way that's profitable to you and helpful to others. Now, there are other instances in the market where I think this has shown itself recently, not just in Bitcoin. Palantir, why did some people buy Palantir when it was $6, $7, $8, $9, and now it is $140, $150? Those people made pretty good money. Money's not everything, but it's pretty important. There's a lot that you can do with it that you can't do without it. So people who saw Palantir at $6, $7, $8, $9 and held it until 120, 30, 40, 50, what was it that allowed them to recognize that a company like that actually has growth prospects, even though, let's say, the market mainstream thought, oh, they're overpriced, their multiple is too high, their CEO is a weirdo. Now, maybe it's because their CEO is a weirdo that you were able, among other weirdos, so to speak, right? Because he's If you know anything about Alex Karp, I think he presents himself as neurodivergent. He's got dyslexia. He recognizes and he has actually incorporated that element of his self-knowledge into his hiring process and into the kind of team that he builds and why he builds that way. So if you were already predisposed to see and to understand this person that the mainstream couldn't really understand, then you clearly had an advantage. And so on. As you look in the market for opportunities, this is clearly a message for people who have some interest in markets and investments and money making. Not financial advice, needless to say. So don't come at me with your lawyers if anything goes wrong here. But it's a valuable exercise to think about how your uniquely odd way of viewing the world, if you have one, can be transformed into something that is advantageous to you without doing harm to others necessarily. If you know that a company is going to grow and you invest in them and you benefit from that investment, I would not call that or consider that to be pure evil. We don't need to get into the details. What does this company do? What does that company do? You may think investing in a company like Palantir is pure evil, or Nvidia you may think is evil because AI is going to take over the world in a bad way. I have friends of mine who think that Amazon is evil, Google is evil, all of these big companies are evil, and therefore, presumably you wouldn't want to invest in them or do business with them. But setting aside the case by case, devil in the details sort of approach, if you see something that other people don't see, you see it early, you can articulate the thesis, maybe, then that's worth knowing about yourself and worth knowing about others. Let's say you've had success, okay? You were able to identify weird trends in the market, again, because of your personal characteristics. There's a lot of good you can do, in my opinion. There's a lot of good you can do with that. Okay, now I'm going to transition here for a minute. For those of you who are still watching, I'm going to transition here for a minute into a topic that comes up in my circles from time to time, which is this. People who are trained in philosophy, as I was in a certain way. I did my bachelor's degree in philosophy. I did my master's and PhD in political science. But in that part of political science that is basically overlapping with philosophy and dealing with the same questions as political philosophy deals with. So for people who are trained in philosophy, there is often a built-in prejudice, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit, against the way of the world, against the people who are merely moneymakers or businessmen or really anything short of philosophers. Okay, so the philosophers have reconciled themselves to a life of poverty. Everybody needs money, but they're not going to sink beneath the dignity of a philosopher and make money. They're just going to ask for it. And on the other hand, people who are involved in worldly affairs, people who do run companies and businesses, people who do care about money or power or influence, they're seen as, second class compared to the pure life of the mind. So I shared this prejudice for a long time. And gradually I have overcome it. It's something I've written about on my Substack, millermanschool.substack.com, and something I've talked about elsewhere, because I think that's kind of a propaganda. It's a little bit of brainwashing. So philosophers should not allow themselves to be brainwashed. And I think some of the programming against a life of activity, a life of entrepreneurship, a life of business, a life of innovation, creation, money making, all the implicit negative attitudes towards that, I think are propaganda. Now, there's so much to say about this topic. So I'm going to take one step where I say something in favor of the philosophical view, and then one step where I say something in favor of the philosopher-builder, to use a phrase that's now being popularized by the Cosmos Institute and Brendan McCord. You should definitely look into the Cosmos Institute. I'd like to do something with them. And Brendan's a great guy. You should look at his interviews, learn about him. So the philosopher-builder, the philosopher-entrepreneur, you can look up a video that I did on becoming a philosopher-entrepreneur. This is a new theme that's arising that I quite like. But I want to tell you something about the hostility against it first. Leo Strauss, who had a history of political philosophy, and not only Leo Strauss, but other thinkers as well, who dealt with the history of ideas, especially the ideas about the good life and the good regime. They observed, for instance, I'm reading right now a book called Ideas Have Consequences by Richard Weaver, and he also observes that modernity Francis Bacon, okay, Descartes, Machiavelli, Hobbes, Locke. The modern thinkers, they transformed the meaning of science and philosophy by directing it towards its utility. Philosophy is useful to the extent to which, and science is useful to the extent to which it can produce comfortable things. So there's a shift in modernity, to simplify, from philosophy and science as primarily and at their peak contemplative endeavors, where you're contemplating the natural order, you're contemplating the divine order, you are contemplating the totality. You are not primarily producing or making, you are understanding, perceiving, grasping, and I would say also in that act, in some sense, blessing, celebrating, rejoicing, giving gratitude. There's something emotional and religious about the peaks of philosophical and scientific comprehension. But the modern thinkers, they said, forget about that. We need to make it useful. Okay? Did you produce an electronic pen? Did you produce new materials, a lens, microphone, light, okay, all the things that are around me? Commodious living, plastics, materials, okay, comforts, creature comforts. Science and philosophy get directed into an active channel, active production. Let's make the world comfortable. Let's make the world safe. Let's make the world entertaining. And the people who are uncomfortable with that transition, who prefer the old, quiet, noble simplicity and grandeur of the ancients, they say the whole problem was that we took Homo sapiens and we made him Homo faber. We took the man of wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, and we made him the man who makes. The philosopher-builder, the philosopher-producer, the philosopher-maker. And so for them, this whole notion of practical endeavor and utility, it is kind of demeaning when compared with the high promise of philosophy as classically understood. And so they want to fight against the tendency to make philosophy useful and to have it culminate in products. And I can understand that. This contrast is important. The shift from Homo sapiens to Homo faber is important, okay? The modern desire to have philosophy and science be effective and productive is important. Absolutely, 100% granted. And yet, it doesn't follow that as we think about that and reflect on that and make sense of that, we who have a philosophical interest must stop working, stop producing, stop creating. For all we know, as we think through this question, there may be a way of understanding creativity, entrepreneurship, innovation that is akin to the classical model, or that preserves an exalted view of philosophical inspiration and understanding. And that's something that I'm deeply interested in. Accounts of the human way of life that include our philosophical capability as well as our creative capability, our productive capability. And I'll give you one way that I've thought about this in the past. You can see the human being as the 0 point, the starting point, the origin of acts of creation and creativity. So man becomes the measure of all things. We are at the center of the universe, and man, the maker, makes the world. So the world is an artificial world of our making. It's a technological world. We're at the heart of it. We are the source of it. Man is the technological god of existence, something like that. You see that reflected in certain outlooks today, and I'm sure that will resonate to some extent with some of you. But there's another view. I call it Heideggerian because Heidegger for me is the one who articulated it most clearly, but there are other versions of it. To speak biblically, you could say man is created in the image of God. Well, among all the things that that might mean, God is a creator. God is the creator. So man's creativity has a divine sanction. And man in creating is undergoing a certain kind of divine imitation. And to say what I said earlier, in my opinion, that also means like in acting that way, we're implicitly also thanking God, blessing God, honoring God, and so on. But you see, these are two different models of creativity, right? One says that we are the measure of all things. Our creativity is a sign of our power, our freedom, our intelligence, and we ascribe all of that to ourselves. In the other one, our creativity is a gift. Our ability to envision and to project and to transform is not of our own making. And even though we may be included in all that's great about creation, whether we are this, whether we're the ones who are making or whether we're benefiting from things that other people have made, it's not that we have to belittle our involvement in that process, but we recognize that the spark of creativity, and not only that, because you don't create in a vacuum. If you have an idea and you want to bring that idea to fruition, you need people, organization, corporation, institution, distribution, marketing. There's a whole operation. Okay. So yes, the creative visionary, he plays a role in that. Maybe it doesn't get started without him, but all by himself, he couldn't get it moving either. So in these acts of creativity, production, innovation, enterprise, entrepreneurship, business, industry, you're also doing social projects, collective projects where people find meaning, fulfillment. They can support their families, their communities. They can support other creators and producers. So there's this actually good, noble, decent side to business creativity. And if you recognize that, maybe there's something just good about all of that. Now, I know there are critics of capitalism who think, no, this run amok, it's going to destroy the environment. It's going to destroy everything. We should tear everything down. Capitalism's bad. Late stage capitalism is even worse. And productivity mantras are a joke. Companies brainwash you into thinking they're family, but they're not. And, they'll trick you into believing that you're being fulfilled, but you're being exploited. You're familiar, I'm sure, with all of the possible criticisms here of the general line of argument I'm making. But the basic point I wanted to say is that the alternative doesn't have to be man is a businessman who creates, produces, makes money, and takes some delight in the objects of all of that economy. Or, he's a poor philosopher who contemplates the high things and looks down on and demeans the self-centered man is the measure of all things approach of the other side. There is a way of understanding the human being that, like I said, both religiously and philosophically, that includes our capacity to understand and our capacity to create, our capacity to receive and our capacity to give, our, as it were, letting things be so that we can have them be as they are, and making things be, producing, creating, projecting. To use a word that may remind you of Heidegger if you've read it, right? The human being is a thrown projection. So both of those parts are there. We didn't throw ourselves, we're thrown. But we also don't stop projecting, we project. We're a thrown projection. Man is a middle being. And that means that we both take and give. We both receive and produce. So that's a long way of saying that on one hand, if you are inclined towards philosophy, wisdom, and spirituality, look, I can't even tell you what to do and what to think about this, because honestly, I didn't come to my opinion about it because someone told me what to think. It's just you live, you reflect, you read, you learn, you do all of these things, and gradually you have your own intuitions, your own understanding, and your own change of heart or whatever it happens to be, or not, right? But to summarize in a sense what it was for me, and I guess what I would advise for you, is don't look down on the people who build and create. You can ask yourself simply at any given moment, look around yourself, look where you are. Did you put up the walls? Did you make the door handles? Okay, you're looking at a computer. Do you know how many people went into, or at a phone, right? Do you know how many people went into the creation of that phone, the production of that phone, or that computer, that technology? What about the production of the wireless infrastructure that allows you to communicate? What about this whole system? So again, the philosophical elitist in me used to reply like this, or the philosophical elitist in you maybe would reply like this. Yeah, yes, I agree. You need a lot of people. The philosopher doesn't exist in a vacuum. He needs society. but society exists for the sake of the philosopher. Okay, like you're standing on top of the corpses of everybody who lived and died because you're the pinnacle of creation and they're the hoi polloi. Maybe not. Okay, maybe not. And even if it were true that society is for the sake of the philosopher, even if you have this kind of, call it roughly Nietzschean view that all suffering and all pain and all lack and all darkness and all bleakness and all evil and everything like that is justified by the existence of the philosopher who needs it, who maybe thrives on it, but at least who steps on it underfoot. Even if you happen to believe that the pinnacle of creation is the philosopher and you are the philosopher, you're the pinnacle of creation. Very convenient, right? So one of the things I learned is the convenience of the view that puts you at the pinnacle of creation. Maybe not. Don't get me wrong. Okay, I still think philosophy is uniquely exalted human potentiality. But still, let me finish the thought here. So even if you think that, you still have to give a lot of credit and you still have to pay a lot of heed to, and you still have to incorporate in your reflection in a meaningful and even loving and understanding way, the significance of all the rest of it. Because you could say, look, if the philosopher depends on the society or the community, on the economy, on production, on something that he didn't produce, but that he requires for his sustenance and for the possibility of his way of life, then that other thing deserves our full gratitude. Because if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't have the other thing. It's like, if it wasn't for your parents, you wouldn't be alive. So however they treated you or mistreated you, there's a certain debt of gratitude that you owe them. Okay, again, doesn't mean you excuse everything they ever did wrong, but there's a certain just built-in debt of gratitude that you owe to the preconditions of your existence, so to speak. And so I have learned not to share in the philosophical propaganda against business and entrepreneurship, and to think more about the positive value of that world. And therefore, if you are somebody who has a philosophical interest, but feels dirty getting involved in honest business, don't. Okay, don't. You don't have to feel dirty getting involved in honest business. And there's no older philosophical imperative than to know thyself. And one of the things that you know when you know yourself, I'm not saying it's the only thing, I'm not even saying it's the most important thing, but one of the things you know when you know yourself is what your aptitudes are, your comparative advantages, what your skills are, how they can be beneficial to you and how they can be beneficial to others. And so to return to where we started, it could be useful for you to know whether in the case of the Myers-Briggs personality types and Bitcoin, or whether it's the Big Five personality test and some other field, it can be helpful to know how your character, not the one that you developed for yourself, but the one that you were born with, predisposes you to be useful to yourself and others. So I thought this was cool anyways, okay, that Bitcoiners are overrepresented among those sections of the population that are underrepresented. Bitcoin, as well as AI, large language models, robotics, all of these new technologies, okay, Grok companions. There are so many things happening where it can be useful for you as a person who's interested in thinking and speaking to pay attention to those phenomena, say something about them. Okay, the world of entrepreneurs needs the insight of philosophers. I think that the philosophers can really benefit from the creativity and energy of the entrepreneur class and whatever. This was a long kind of public service announcement. First of all, just sharing that interesting article. And secondly, telling you, don't succumb to the propaganda against being a productive citizen. Even as you learn about the full history of philosophy, the difference between the philosopher and the citizen, and the transition from the classical to the modern, where the modern made science productive and the classical kept science contemplative. Thank you for watching. You can see my online courses at millermanschool.com, my writing at millermanschool.substack.com. Comment, like, share, subscribe, and let me know what other topics you'd like me to cover in the future. Thanks for watching. Take care.